sin. Because it doesn't really express or explain what's really going on. When I think about what happened to Adam and Eve, I don't think, oh, they sinned. I just think, well, because of what they did, the mistake they made, they became incredibly hurt and incredibly damaged. And Eve was incredibly damaged. I just feel so sorry for her. To see her like a young girl, and she got into this kind of relationship, and she got completely messed up on the inside. Totally messed up on the inside. And then she got into this relationship with Adam, and he unfortunately, went along with that. And he also got completely messed up. That's what happened to their children. This kind of messed up family. And that became a pattern of human history. And, sometimes when I was a school teacher, sometimes a little, 13 or 14-year-old would come into the classroom and they'd be really angry and say unpleasant things at me. And I'm thinking, what have I done? But, obviously you can't let them just go away, so keep them back after class and find out what happened. And they usually had a falling out with their mum and dad before they came into school, and they're carrying around all this baggage and thoughts and feelings, and easily gets triggered. Say the wrong thing and something all comes out. That's just the way people are. This kind of stuff got passed on. And so we often talk about restoration, but often really in many ways it's just healing things. People are damaged and need to be fixed, need to be healed. We need to be made whole again, the way we're supposed to be. So in that sense, of course, the restoration and search of our true self, who we're supposed to be. So talk about this indemnity thing. I can't bear the word indemnity. Because it doesn't really explain what's going on. Anybody here like indemnity? Yeah. No, it has all kinds of connotations. People often think, oh, it's suffering. Suffering and paying indemnity. Sometimes people say, I fell down the stairs, so there must be indemnity. I had a car accident, oh, it's indemnity. And unfortunately, that's the way often this word has been misused within our spiritual community. But if you actually go back to the book itself, it's quite interesting what it says. It says, to restore something, one must make the necessary effort or pay the due price. So if you fall down the stairs, that's not indemnity, and you break your leg, that's just falling down the stairs and breaking your leg. Indemnity is what you need to do to restore something. So indemnity is picking up the phone and getting an ambulance to come along, pick you up, take you to the hospital, and get your legs set. And then you walk around on crutches, and eventually you're restored to the way you were before you broke your leg. So indemnity is the whole process of healing what needs to be done. Let's say if you've got a headache, there's a headache indemnity. Indemnity is taking an aspirin. Because when you take an aspirin, you restore your head to the state it was before you got a headache. But it also says it will pay the due price. So if you fall down the stairs and you break your leg and you don't go to the hospital, what happens? You become a cripple. That's the due price. So if you don't do the necessary, if you don't go to the hospital and you don't get a doctor to see to you, you pay the due price, which is become a cripple. That makes sense? So that's just the way it is. So if you have a car accident, in a car accident is not indemnity. Indemnity is taking the car to the garage and paying the bill. So paying indemnity is paying the bill to get your car repaired. That makes sense? An accident is just an accident. Okay? That's what it says in the book. If you drop something, you have to bend it, pick it up. Sometimes, it's painful, but it doesn't have to be painful. Indemnity should be about healing and a relief of pain. Sometimes if your leg is broken particularly badly, and they don't have an anesthetic, and they have to straighten it out manually, it may be incredibly painful, but that's just not necessary. It doesn't have to be like that. It's not better because it's painful. You're not paying more indemnity because you're suffering more or experiencing more pain. Does that make sense? So the suffering, indemnity is a relief of suffering. It's making the world the way it's supposed to be. Sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes you have to work really hard and you do suffer but the goal is to make things the way they're supposed to be. Yeah, and sometimes it's not easy. Does that make sense? So endemicity is a reversal of the process which led to the loss of original positional state. So it means doing things in reverse. You know, if you drop something, you bend down, pick it up, and put it back there. Okay? So indemnity is not repetition. Repeating what went wrong is not restoring it. Yeah? Repetition is repetition. Repetition is when you just make the same mistake all over again. That's not restoration. Restoration is find yourself, well, there it is. Restoration occurs when you find yourself in a similar position to Adam and Eve, the archangel Cain and Abel. So you find yourself with a similar kind of thoughts and feelings and emotions that Adam and Eve, or the archangel Cain or Abel, or your father or your grandfather or your grandmother had. You find yourself in a similar situation, you experience the same kind of thought patterns and emotions and feelings, and you want to react and do exactly the same thing that they did, following the same pattern. But instead you stop, and you take time out, and you pray, and you think about it, and you face the same temptation to make the same mistake they did and continue the pattern of fallen history. But you choose not to do so, and instead of acting out of your fallen nature, you act according to your original nature. You'll follow your conscience. And that's what restoration is. It's about finding yourself in a similar situation that you found yourself in as a child, or your father, or your grandfather, or whatever, grandmother, and you find yourself with a temptation to do the same thing they did, but you say, no, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do it differently. Yeah? That's restoration. It's restoring that. Okay, so I had this experience, I was just talking actually about it at lunch. When I went to boarding school, not quite as nice as Hogwarts, but it was a boarding school nevertheless. And I was there from 13 to 18. And while I was there, I had a particular teacher who was my tutor, who was responsible for my academic development and welfare and my pastoral welfare. So I used, from when I was 13, I used to go around quite regularly to visit him, and he was married. And they're both, he and his wife were in their mid-20s, early mid-20s, quite new teachers. So I used to go around there and have tea, etc., etc. Anyway, so as I got older, when I was about 17, I started to fall in love with my tutor's wife. I started to develop all these emotional feelings and desires, and I decided that I felt I really loved her, and I wanted to marry her. There's only one problem. What was that? She's already married. So I thought, I wish her husband would die. Then I could marry her. Okay, that's the kind of person I am. Not very nice person. So I thought, I wish her husband would die, then I could marry her. Okay? And then I thought, then I realised actually I'm not a very nice person. I realised I'm such a selfish, nasty, self-centered person. If I really loved her, I would want her husband to live and for them to remain happily married, yes? So I went through that experience. And then just the nature of the relationship I had with her. Anyway, so I decided I had to go and explain this, what I'd gone through. And so I went around for tea and, drank about 10 cups of tea. And then I plucked up the courage to tell my tutor's wife, I've fallen in love with you, I want to marry you, and I want your husband to die. But I've realised now I'm such a selfish person, I don't want that anymore. I just want you to be happy. Okay? And then she was very happy to hear me say this. And then she said, why don't you come and tell my husband? So I drank about another 10 cups of tea, then I went next door to the study where he was marking his schoolwork. And she said, William's got something to say to tell you. She said, what's up? And I said, I've fallen in love with your wife. I wanted to get married to her, and I want you to die. But I realised I'm actually a really selfish person, and now I don't want that anymore. I just want you to be really happy. Okay, and then we had this very beautiful experience, like this feeling God's grace. Anyway, so about a couple of years later, I heard the principle. And I realised I went through similar kind of emotions and feelings that Lucifer went through, but I prayed about it, I thought about it, realised actually I'm a really selfish person, and I didn't pursue that kind of path. Yes. But I know, as you know, there are lots of young men, not even young men, who develop these sorts of thoughts and feelings and desires, and they pursue them. You know, one person after another, after another. Yes? So that's restoration. I found myself in a similar, very mild, restoration, similar situation to Lucifer, and I went through those emotions and feelings, and I started doing what he did, I did it differently, and that changed my whole relationship with women after that changed. I never, before as a young boy, I was often thinking, I'm going to get this girl into bed, but after that, I never thought like that ever again. Because if I really loved a girl or a woman, I wouldn't want to do that. Yes, because that's not love, that's just selfishness, that's just me wanting them for myself. It's just selfishness, selfish love. Yeah, that makes sense? And so that changed my relationship a lot. Okay?
It's incredible courage to say that. Normally most people wouldn't let this out, or they keep it to themselves.
The way I was. I'm not quite as open as I used to be. But that's just the way I was. I was a Christian, and they were Christians, and I was always challenging myself to be completely honest and open and transparent. Not just with them, but also with a very close friend I had at school as well. Just to say everything and anything. That's just the way it was at that stage of my life. And I used to read loads of stuff, and I did transactional analysis and Jung and all sorts of things when I was a teenager.
Very rare.
Yeah, anyway. That's just the way it was. Anyway, so that's what I think what restoration is. You find yourself in the same sort of feelings as Cain did, or as Abel did, or as Uncle Laban did, or as Jacob, or Esau, as I said, one of our own direct ancestors, and we face the similar challenges and temptations, and one has to do it differently. And so there's lots of stories in the Bible of restoration. There's these stories, I'm not going to go through all of these, just a few. The parent-child relationship became completely damaged for that, trying to restore that proper relationship between parents and children. That's what the Noah story is about. Abraham, Isaac, which I will look at, Rebecca, Jacob. Then the husband and wife relationship became distorted, so trying to repair that and restore it to the way it's supposed to be. Sister-sister relationship, Sarah and Hagar, Rachel and Leah. Adam and Eve, Lucifer relationship, which we'll look at. And then the Lucifer Adam. So all these relationships became damaged because of the fall. And so people, all kinds of wrong ways of reacting, wrong ways of interacting, wrong patterns of thought, etc. come on. And all these things need to be restored and fixed so that things change. So have a look at, this whole change of lineage thing started off in Abraham's family. Like everything went wrong in Adam's family, so we'll look at that. And so have a look here. So God, as you know, from principle, Ham was in the position of Abel because of the mistakes that he made. Satan was able to invade, and so then God was able to take Abraham, who was the third son of Terah, and an idol maker. So do you think it was as easy as that? God is just able to take Abraham? So what's happening here? Abraham is changing his lineage from Satan's lineage to God's lineage. Yes? So how does that happen? How did Abraham change his lineage? So if we look here, where's the change of lineage done? On the individual level, man has to go beyond the boundary of life and death. The individual has to go through life and death situations for the sake of God and the future dignity of man. Okay, so this is a life and death situation of going one way at the risk of your life instead of another way. So have a look at these. Did I tell you these stories how Abraham discovered gold before? Do you know how Abraham discovered gold? Do you think it's an important thing to know?
I don't think so.
Who's the father of our faith? Abraham. So we should know. How did Abraham come into a relationship with God? So I'll tell you the story, just to prove you're not making it up. Books about it. So this story then is recorded in the Quran, and it's also recorded in the Talmud, which are the Jewish commentaries on the Bible. Anyway, so Abraham, when he was a little boy, he had a favourite word. What do you think it was? Why? And you answer that one, and then what do they say next?
Why?
And then you answer, yes, that's the way it goes, isn't it? Why do people do that?
Looking for answers.
Yeah, because we want to understand the world in which we live. We want to make sense of the world in which we live. And so Abraham was like that. He's always going around, why, drove his pants totally around the bit. And so you want to understand, why do things work? Why is this like that? Anyway, so one day, he realised he existed. And he thought, where do I come from? Why am I here? And he didn't know. He realised I haven't always been around. In my memory, only goes back a certain way. And so he said to Mum and Dad, where do I come from? And they explained this whole story that they got married and they loved each other very much, and that, his mum gave birth to him. And then he started bowing down and worshipping his parents, because he thought, you created me, you're my God, I'm going to worship you. And anyway, after a while, he said to his mum and dad, have you always existed? And they said, no. They said, where did you come from? They said, well, we have parents, that's grandma and grandpa. So he stopped worshipping his parents and went next door and started worshipping his grandparents. And he said to his Grandma, you have got so many wrinkles, it looks to me like you've existed forever. And she said, no, I have parents as well. And he said, where are they? I want to go and worship them, because they created you. And she said, they're dead. They're now buried in the graveyard. So he went off to the graveyard, and he, rubbing on the tombstones, he found his great-grandparents, and he started bowing down to them. And then he thought, well, I want to know my great-great-grandparents are, so he found their tombstones, started worshipping them. He went around worshipping his ancestors. Anyway, one day, some grave diggers came to bury somebody, and he went to have a look, and when they were digging, they disturbed another grave. And he looked inside and all he saw were bones and dust. And he realised, gosh, that's where we come from. We're just made up of the dust, the earth. And so he started worshipping the earth. And then the sun went out, didn't come on one day, he felt really cold, and he realised, actually when the sun comes out, I feel life. Life comes from the sun. So he started worshipping the sun. Anyway, after a while, he realised, actually everything in this world is changing. There must be some invisible, unchanging reality behind everything. I've got parents and grandparents, you can work it all the way back. There must be an unchanging first cause, there must be the beginning of everything. And he decided to himself, I'm going to worship the invisible God who created the heavens and the earth. And that's how he came to the conclusion that God exists, and started worshipping God. So he's like a philosopher, really. Okay? Make sense? Anyway, one day, his dad was an idol maker, and so one day Terah said to Abraham, look, I can't go to the market tomorrow, can you go down to the market instead of me and sell the idols? So Abraham said, yes, of course, Dad. So the next morning he loaded up the van with all the tables and all the idols, and he drove down into the marketplace, and he put out his table with all the idols, the gods, these little statues on the table with the little price tags, and he waited for customers to come. Then an old lady came along, and she said to Abraham, I want to buy one of your gods. And Abraham said, why? What happened to the other ones you used to have? And she said, somebody broke in and stole them. And Abraham said, well, they obviously weren't very powerful, were they? And she said, no. But you're such a handsome young man, I'm sure your gods are much more powerful, so I want to buy one. And Abraham, who, honestly speaking, wasn't very polite, he said, how old are you, old woman? And she said, I'm 85 years old. And he said, look, my dad made these idols, these statues, last month in his workshop for the stone and wood. Why would you, an 85-year-old woman, want to bow down and worship them? And she said, you're right, Abraham. It's stupid, isn't it? They should be bowing down and worshipping me. I'm older than they are. And so she said to Abraham, who do you worship then, Abraham? And Abraham said, I worship the invisible God who created the heavens and the earth. And she said, okay, I'm going to worship him too. And she became his first disciple. Anyway, at the end of the day, Abraham went home, rang the doorbell, and his dad came and said, did you sell out? Abraham said, no, Dad, I didn't sell anything today. And Terah said, why not? Was somebody there undercutting you? What happened? And Abraham told the story of the old woman and all the other customs that came along. And Terah said, oh, God, what a stupid son I've got. No way are you ever going to sell anything. You're a lousy salesman. That's a rubbish sales pitch you've got. And so the next one, Terah said, right, I'm going to the market this time. You stay at home and look after the gods in the temple. And so Abraham went into the temple. And he went up to the largest god and said to him, I'll be your messenger. You tell me what to say and I'll travel around the whole world bringing your message to the world. And the idol said nothing. So Abraham said, right, I'll go and make you something to eat. Maybe we can talk after lunch. So he went into the kitchen, made a nice English breakfast and put it in front of the idol and went out. Then he came back in and the food was untouched. And Abraham said to the gods, the big statues, he said, you're not gods. You have no power, you have no speech, you can't move, you can't do anything. No way am I worshipping you. And then he went into his father's workshop and got a sledgehammer and he went round and he smashed all the gods, all the statues, all the idols. And it was caught on CCTV camera, it's the evidence. And then he put the sledgehammer in the hands of the largest idol. And then he went out. Terah came back at the end of the day, he'd sold out, he'd done so well. He went into the temple to bring his fundraising results and offer them to the gods. When he went into the temple, he saw all the idols had been smashed. He said to Abraham, Abraham, what happened? I told you to stay here and look after them. Did somebody break in and smash them? And Abraham said, no, Dad, I did exactly what you said. I went in to wish them good morning, to take care of them. And the biggest one, he said, you haven't given him any breakfast. So I went into the kitchen and made him a nice English, and I left him to eat. But while I was outside, I heard all the little idols telling the big one that he should share his food with them. And you know what? That big one is so selfish, he wouldn't share his breakfast with them. And so he went out into a workshop, he took a sledgehammer, he beat them all up. He's a real thug. And look, there he is, he's still holding the sledgehammer. And Terah said, what are you talking about? They can't move, they can't speak, they can't eat, they can't do anything. Exactly, said Abraham. So why do you worship them? And then Terah was really shocked. Well, who do you worship then, Abraham? And Abraham said, I worship the invisible God who created the heavens and the earth. And Terah was really surprised. He said, look, I better take you to visit our local ruler, Nimrod, and you better tell him about this. And Nimrod was, there's an archetype of Stalin and Hitler and Saddam Hussein, all these dictators who like to think that, that they're God. Anyway, so Terah took Abraham to visit Nimrod, and Terah bowed down in front of Nimrod, and Abraham looked at him. And Nimrod said, why don't you bow down and worship me? I'm your God. And Abraham said, I only bow down and worship the invisible God who created the heavens and the earth, and who stands in judgment on you for all your wicked deeds. And Nimrod was furious. And he said, if you don't bow down and worship me, I'm going to have you thrown into prison and put to death. And Abraham said, I don't fear you. God is more real to me than you are. God is more real to me than the palace in which you live in. If you put me to death, I know I will be with God my Father in the next world. And so Nimrod was outraged and had Abraham thrown into a fiery furnace, but he wasn't burned and he came out. And then at that point, Terah said, maybe it's time to move. And so Terah and his family then moved from up to Haran. That's where the Bible starts, at that point there. So these are stories about the kind of person Abraham was. A person who changed his identity at the risk of his life. So I'm sure there are many people who came to the conclusion, yes, God exists, but when they were threatened with their life, compromised. So Abraham was someone who wouldn't compromise with what he knew to be true. He was totally absolute faith and totally uncompromising in his identity, in his sense of self, of who he was. He knew who he was. So that's interesting stories. Yeah, that's the kind of person he was. And so God said to Abraham, leave your land, your birthplace, this is from your father's house, and go to the land I will show you. So this again is a momentous journey. Abraham, he left his land, he left his birthplace, he left his father's house, and he went to this land. God was going to show him the land of Canaan. So this is an idea that, that sometimes we think we're the product of our background, we're the product of our social forces. Well, I was born in this poor family, and because of poverty and this, and this, then I have very low aspirations, and it's impossible for me ever to become anything other than where I come from, my background. Yeah? Who I am is determined by my class, my social class, or by how wealthy my family is, and my background. Sort of the Marxist kind of perspective. So God said to Abraham, leave your land, leave that behind. You're not determined by your social class, on your wealth, how wealthy you are. He said, leave your birthplace. So, in other words, you're not determined by your genes. You may have this genetic inheritance, well, that doesn't determine who you are. The future is open. And also, we're not determined by our childhood. Leave your father's house. So it was this kind of journey, because up until then time was very cyclical. People thought, well, the past determines the future, but God was intervening, saying, no, this is your past, but your future is open. And it's like a new beginning of freedom and responsibility. The idea then that the future is not determined by the past, the future is not predestined, there is no such thing as fate. The future is open. So that's the beginning of a new vision of history, a new understanding of time, that time is linear, as opposed to cyclical, which is the old-fashioned view of time. In the ancient world, in the Middle Ages, if you're born a blacksmith, if your father's a blacksmith, what would be your profession? Blacksmith, and you die a blacksmith, yes? It was like that. People were stuck, okay? In the ancient world, it was like that. Time was cyclical. You just accepted your situation. In Hinduism, for example, in India, if you live because of reincarnation, if you're born an untouchable, why is that? That's because you led such a bad life in the previous life, so you're untouchable. If you stay good untouchable, then the next time round you can be born one step up, etc., etc. And if you're born to the highest, whatever the Quran is called now, rubbish Hari teacher, then that's because you did well in the previous time. So that is the view of the ancient world. Abraham's view was different. The future is open. The future is not determined by the past, etc. So then God blessed Abraham. I'll bless you, make your name great, so you'll be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you, and him who curses you I'll curse. And by you all the families of the earth shall bless themselves. Okay, so the word is, you talk about three blessings. Blessing is a very, very common word in the Bible. This understanding of receiving a gift, a blessing. And an interesting word. It means, in Hebrew, the root comes from the same root as the word knee. And the knee is the weakest part of our body.